Sure.
that are considered environment. So it can't, again, I don't disagree, that may not have been Jane Moore's expressed intent in 1995, 1996, but that's the unintended consequences of it, is that's how parcel B and C got shifted away from conservation into HDR. That's all, that's the legislative record, so.
Okay, well, I'll agree to disagree, because to me, when I look at this, it's not marked. It wasn't marked before, it was marked, now suddenly it's not marked. It leaves room for speculation, but if we just throw all that out the window and let's just say, let's look at it now. It seems from discussions from the public that based on easements, based on the core, based on documentation, that this was a piece of land that was never meant to have development on. So I'm in line with trying to rezone this back to conservation as it was originally intended. I mean, the fact that whether it's privately or publicly owned, it was still conservation land. I mean, the title had to be changed, obviously, because of the designation and the settlement, but that doesn't change the fact that it was originally seen as conservation land not to be built on.
Well, land that is held for a spoils easement isn't necessarily conservation land, and in fact, if it's a spoils easement that's used with some frequency, that is actually inconsistent with conservation purposes, because the application of additional sands tends to bury everything that's there. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Isn't there more than just a spoils easement, though? I mean, my understanding is there's two separate easements in essence. One is the spoils easement, but then there's the entire structure easement that is the entire jetty system.
I don't think, I haven't heard that the jetty system has a separate easement on the second. I know only of the spoils easement on parcel B. Now, the jetty system undoubtedly has an easement. Well, the jetty system is located on government land, so it doesn't need an easement since it's titled in the U.S. government.
And I've heard the Corps talk about, within the four corners of that spoils easement, they have the sand dike and things that have been discussed tonight, but I believe it was all memorialized in that spoils easement they have that impacts a significant portion of parcel B and C.
It sounds like you might be agreeing that there is an easement that goes on a significant portion of those, if not all of it.
I've always been in agreement that parcel B and C is impacted by a spoils easement that the private property owner has with the Corps of Engineers. I don't think it's ever been in dispute. Now, whether or not it impacts, we've heard representatives from Holiday Isle opine that it impacts all of parcel B and all of C, or whether or not it's a significant portion. I've never looked at the specific legal descriptions and overlaid it, but I think it does impact a significant portion of parcel B and C.
Sure. I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from some of the other council because, knowing that it was originally conservation and, the speakers tonight and other nights that have brought forth different information, I think it's important that we take that into consideration.
Yeah, we've got some more, and we can circle back to you if you'd like, Mr. Ramswell. Okay, next up is Mr. Foreman.
Thank you, Mayor. When did parcel B first become private property? Do we know that?
And actually, I don't have the exact date.
In general.
But it is subject to a long-term lease from the federal government.
In what year?
I'm not sure. Do we have?
According to the property appraisers, it was owned by the United States in 1973. In 1980, it became White Sands Corporation.
So it was then purchased by a private?
As an assignment of lease.
It was assigned a lease.
It was either purchased or acquired or something. In that early 1980s, I think it transferred into private control.
But it is now private property.
Well, all of the land, the unique thing about the land on Holiday Isle is that that land is actually held as long-term leaseholds. Those are 100-year leases from the federal government originally, and that interest in land is treated as the same as a fee title ownership interest.
Do they pay taxes?
Yes, they do.
So somewhere in this chronology that we've been discussing, it became a federal government property that ultimately converted to a lease, which in turn is treated as private property. And as such, because it's private property, under our definition, can't be considered a conservation area.
Pursuant to the settlement agreement and the city council back in the 1995, 1996 timeframe.
That's correct.
Converted all privately owned conservation land to some other land use designation. We are of the opinion that parcel B was shifted to HDR at that time.
Mayor, it might be helpful if I contribute a little bit of historical reference. Remember, please, that East Pass is not a natural pass. The natural pass was about in where Shoreline Towers is now. So Holiday Isle is a part of Santa Rosa Island, which in the Okaloosa part has a misnomer of Okaloosa Island, but that historically is all Santa Rosa Island. That was federal property. And there was techniques installed by the federal government that permitted private ownership, which initially were these 100-year renewable leases, which, as Ms. Shirley has said, are treated as fee simple from the perspective of ownership. But, and even now there's the opportunity to actually convert those titles to fee simple and a deed as opposed to a long-term lease. But,
Not the intent of the federal government at any point in time to maintain those properties as conservation areas.
no, so they got transferred for private ownership.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Foreman. Next up, Mr. Marlar.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to try to keep this in perspective. I'm looking at a Google map of the area, and I'm trying to understand, one thing is how much of this blank land is actually developable from the backside of there's several townhomes and condos on the backside of that, or I should say on the leeward side of that, and then to the left and to the right of that. That's part of the contingency, the part of the problem. The second part of the problem is how does, and I think Mr. Miller explained that, how government land ends up being private ownership, including conservation land. And the third thing I say is this: part of the problem that we have and why we've had to discuss this parcel B and parcel C for so long is because of the misconception that it's possible that the developers of the two parcels are going to put something there, okay? And, you know, it goes back to, well, I don't like it because it's in my backyard, but it's legal. You know, that's one thing. So I'm going to ask, I'd like to ask Mr. Matthews to come up, if it's okay, Mayor. I have a question for him that might solve some of the problem, or he might not be able to tell me. Depends on the litigation that they're in now.
Dave Matthews, and I haven't read this 246-page packet.
That's okay.
So, go ahead. I'll do my best.
This is the first part of it, okay? The question is that, first, I don't know what the litigation you have going on with the Holiday Isle Association is. I'll be totally honest. I have no idea what they're litigating against you or against the owner of parcel B and parcel C. My question is, can you tell me, or can it be found and put in stone what the owners plan on doing with that beach? Because the conception is that they're afraid I understand where the homeowners are coming from. They don't want certain things built there. And I understand that. I really, personally, looking at the map, I wouldn't have put the drive of lands in there because it's right there off the Gulf and it surrounds part of that lake and the other part of the lake, you know, because I remember when all this was developed, and I personally wouldn't have put anything out there. It used to be nice, pristine land, and everybody gets their little land and they get their property and all that. But the problem seems to exist, and I'm going to call it out this way. The developer is being quiet about if they are or not going to build anything on that property, because that seems to be the bone of contention with everybody here. Are they going to build something? If they're going to build it, are they going to block my land, stop me from going to the beach, or stop something like that? Now, if that litigation that you have between the association has nothing to do with that, I'm asking very simply if you or somebody from the property owners, the parcel B and parcel C, can come up and say, hey, we're not going to build anything. We want it to stay a beach because, one, we can't really build anything because we don't have the property for it, because that seems to be the main problem, is everybody thinks somebody's going to build something. And, I mean, my opinion is that it should stay like it is. You know, it should stay beach and stay pretty. But everybody's so afraid somebody's going to build something on it and mess up their property values, and I understand that totally. I wouldn't, you know, if I were in their position here, I don't think I'd want certain things built next to me. So
Let me see if I can
you said you represent the property owner, so that's where I'm calling you down on the carpet on that.
There was many points to your question, so I'm going to try to kind of give a little overview like Mr. Miller did to try to help understand some of the historical. Property went into private ownership in 1980. The Okaloosa, or what we call Holiday Isle, like Mr. Miller said, used to be part of all Santa Rosa Island before they put the weir system in it. And when White Sands development, which was Uncle Bob Sykes and two of his partners, got a 99-year lease with a 99-year option to renew on everything that we know as Holiday Isle today. And they proceeded to develop it. And it's been developed as long-term leaseholds with right to renew. But the conversion to fee simple was an act of the legislature and Congress, actually, 15, 20 years ago, that said, even though you have a long-term lease out there, they set up a mechanism through the Okaloosa County Property Appraiser's Office, and you go pay them $350, and they get title work, and then you end up with fee simple title. Most of the properties on Holiday Isle today are fee simple. Most people have afforded themselves that opportunity, so you're not stuck with a 99-year lease with a 99-year option to renew. This property, Parcel B, is fee simple title ownership and has been for quite some time. My client has not owned that property except for a few years now. It was either the Destin, trying to remember, I think it's Destin City Council, through some of the records that we looked at, approved a 798-unit condo project for all of Destin Point, which included Parcel B at one time. They built one building, a 66-unit mag house building, which was out there, and they couldn't sell anymore. And then, of course, we had the S&L crisis that took place in the 80s, and they went through some series of buying out some loans, and it all got under the name of Destin Guardian Corp., which was a guy named Phil Harrington out of Little Rock, who came back and converted it to not Parcel B, and not 160, which is in the middle of the project, but the rest of it into a single-family home lot subdivision, which is what you see when you go out there today. The litigation between that association and my client is, we don't think you have declarant rights, we don't think you can change the CCRs, we don't think you can build on Parcel B, we don't think you can build your 9-story DO that the prior developer got that is still in existence for a condo project on Lot 160. HIIA, Holiday Isle Improvement Association, has joined the bandwagon, filed separate lawsuits, and says you can't build anything there as well. So that's, again, all up to the courts to decide what we can and can't build. As far as the core, I think Parcel B is 13.5 acres. I provided the surveys to staff previously. I think it's like 13 and a half acres. All but 6 acres, I think, is subject to the spoils easement. The spoils easement is exactly what it is. It's for the core to be, there were 7 spoils easements from Narega Point to the jetties on that east side. The core abandoned 6 of them over the years. The only one left is the one that is on Parcel B, and I think I've heard that at least part of it's on parcel C. I don't know, I haven't surveyed that. And it's literally an easement to put sand. It hasn't been used in many, many years, but there is a spoils easement. And that would, any person who owns a piece of property and would look to go to develop a piece of property, and you have an easement in favor of the federal government to put sand on some portion of your property, wouldn't make much sense to go seek a development order to try to develop that piece, because you'd be looking at a lawsuit from the Corps of Engineers. So they try to answer your question shortly. Is there any current plans to develop it? No. However, things could have to change in the future. I mean, I'd be very candid with you about it. If this city council would like this property to be in the hands of the public and turn it into a public park, and the lady that we saw that came up here earlier with the public trust fund, and you want to get some money from them to go buy this property and turn it into public parking and a public park for all of the citizens of Destin, that you have those procedures available. You have it through private negotiations, you have it through eminent domain proceedings, and can pay for the fair market value. If you don't think the property is worth much because there's a spoils easement on it today, maybe this is the time you ought to be looking at those options. But for spot zoning or inverse condemnation or Burt-Harris Act, by changing something that clearly there was not, I want to make sure everybody understood what Scott, Shirley, and Greg Casala said. There was not a conservation land use element in place in 1996. There was an area drawn on the Gulf Front properties of a 50-foot buffer zone, if you will, that as part of the lawsuit with Summer Chase, that buffer zone went away. They created a brand new category called conservation. Typically, you see conservation is publicly lands. It's lands that may be environmentally sensitive. Now, maybe people here might want to argue that that should be a conservation property. Well, you have you have conservation lands, publicly owned lands, if y'all want to buy it or eminent domain it. But right now, it's private property, just like all the other properties that had the 50-foot buffer on it that got removed and got another land use designation put on it. There was nothing nefarious about what happened in 1996. It's today, because of the litigation that's been going on out there with my client and other neighbors, is why this has come to the forefront.
Thank you, Mr.
Anyway,
Matthews.
I hope
And,
that
I
answers your
yeah,
question.
That
thank
answers,
you,
I
Mr.
have
Matthews.
one final question for you.
Mr. Marlar.
Can you provide to this council, I don't know if you will, I'm sure you can, a survey map of what's actual buildable or the private part versus the conservation? Because that seems, we keep looking at these maps, and I'm trying to wrap my hand around on what is developable, what's not developable, because it's conservation. We've actually put a section of it as conservation, but I don't see a way of survey saying what can and cannot be built on.
Yeah, I can provide you a survey. Same, the staff's got it. I can send another
got it.
one.
Do we
I
have
don't
it?
remember if it had
Yes,
the
we do.
core overlay easement on it, but we have that.
Yeah, I don't have, the one you gave me does not have the core easement overlaid on it.
Yeah, I've got, and I'll be more than happy to provide it to staff and to Mr. Shirley.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Matthews. Appreciate it very much. Yeah.
You talked about the spoils easement. Do you have any knowledge about a sand dike that transverses it north-south the parcel?
The easement, when you look at the easement language, and not the easement, I mean the actual easement itself, all the different ones, they don't show you anything subterranean. And have we gone out and run borings and taken machines to try to figure out what's under there? No, we have not. So I don't know if there is any actual groin or rock structure or anything like that.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews.
I
Appreciate
got
it.
one more question for Mr. Shirley.
Okay, good.
You're okay, you're okay.
Thanks,
Mr.
Mr.
Matthews.
Shirley. Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Shirley, like I said, based on this Google map, now, does the conservation area change accordingly with the land, with the sand? Sometimes I have seen both sides of the jetty exposed. The map I'm looking at shows a big cut into it because the jetty actually makes a slight, tiny lip.
What changes is the shape of the uplands because of the forces of erosion and accretion caused by the movement of water through the inlet. So you'll see that little crinoline bay area embayment there right behind the jetty is caused by the swash of water as the tide moves past that little jetty there. So that may change the shoreline, but it doesn't change the property boundaries on the uplands that separates the state-owned land from the land that constitutes parcels B and C. That boundary is more landward of where the shoreline is changing.
Unless we had a
Except
huge
in one
hurricane.
small
yeah.
area. Right, yeah, unless we have a hurricane, but that wouldn't change the boundary, of the parcels, because would be an avulsive event, which under state law does not change property boundaries, and they would have a right to restore the land area to the original dimensions.
Okay, and my final comment is, this whole thing is just, believe me, has gotten out of proportion, but if I'd had a say back in the day, I wouldn't have even built Destin Point, because I would have left everything in conservation, but we can't go there.
Thank you, Mr. Marler. Next up, Mr. Dixon.
Yeah, one of the things I did not see in the package that I was given is advertisements, and I know we talked about advertisements within the last year, because I had a person call me that had nothing to do with this, but on another particular piece of property, and they didn't have any idea that their stuff had changed, and you know, I didn't see any advertisement in this and how we notify the public with this. The next thing is that the Corps of Engineers, do we have a letter into the Corps of Engineers to say to them that you know, we would resist any attempt to remove that spoils easement? Or do we, or can we, or you know, is there a way that we can provide that, or do I need to make a motion to that effect, or what? But this spoils easement is very essential in the fact that if we need to dredge our pass, that is where our charter boats come and go from. We got to make sure we have a place to put that sand. And I don't know if we have any conversation, or I would like personally for us to have a letter on file with the Corps of Engineers to resist any attempt to remove that spoils easement. So that's my first thing. And the second thing is, like I said, I didn't see any advertisement on this.
Yeah, but we didn't dig through, and I'm sure there's, of course, I don't know what was in, what we still have in our records in 95, 96, whether or not we have any of the advertisements where things were noticed and those kind of things. I mean, those files may or may not be still available. Have you seen anything like that, Scott?
I have not. We would have to check with the clerk's office to see if they retain that information.
Okay.
I do know that under state law, after 5 years, there's a statute of repose on the procedures regarding the adoption of ordinances, that you can't raise a procedural issue after 5 years, after 5 years after the adoption of the ordinance. You can't raise that as a method by which to challenge the validity of the ordinance.
Okay, well, I'm not really trying to challenge the validity of it. I just wanted to see how we were notifying the people.
Well, relating to the dredging, let me make sure the dredging of the East Pass, the permit that the Corps of Engineers has in their hands to dredge the East Pass, that sand is directed to the west. It does not go to the east, okay? And that was a settlement that the Corps of Engineers entered into with, you know, the property owners to the west as it relates to that sand. The inlet management plan that we now have in place allows the sand to go to the beaches east or west that is most critically eroded. But the actual permit, if they went out there right now and dredged, that sand would go to the west, not to the east, not to the spoils easement. That's a glitch, and the Corps has committed to work with us to modify that permit, but right now, that's the permit that's in place, so.
That could change too.
Well, it could change, but I'm just factually just making sure that, and to my knowledge, the city council has never taken a position relating to retainage of that spoils easement.
This is about the muddiest thing I think I've ever seen while I've been on the council here. I made a suggestion at the last meeting that we hire a independent attorney to take a look at this and try to come up with what they see as everything that they've been laid out here, and to try to give us a recommendation on how we should proceed with anything that could be coming in the future. I'm going to make that recommendation again tonight, that I'll make a motion that we hire a special land use attorney of some type to review all the paperwork here and to be able to come up with a determination as to whether or not this is a buildable piece of property.
Is that a motion, Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I know, Ms. Trammell, we have to have a vote to set aside the order of the day. There's an indication you had said that that there may needs to be, to bring it back for a vote for next meeting, but,
Well, this was agended.
This
so-
one.
oh, that's true, this is
Okay,
agenda.
I
so-
was talking about unagendized.
Okay, you're right, correct, forgive me. It's late, 9:30. That's my bedtime. All right, we have a first by Mr. Dixon, second by Mr. Marlar to hire outside counsel. We have some other people that have discussion. Ms. Trammell, you're first. Okay, thank you, Ms. Trammell. Ms. Ramswell?
Thank you, Mayor. I actually just sent Webb Warren a map that I have that is, I believe it's from the Corps of Engineers, and it shows a sand dike that runs the entire length of parcel B and down into the state-owned easement. And then up at the top, it shows the privately owned easement. So you've got the sand dike and a privately owned easement, and it forms essentially a T.
And I've seen that, those sand dikes referenced, I think as Mr. Matthews has referenced, the document itself, at least my reading of it, you will hear the Corps talk about the sand dike and that they need parcel B and C for the structural integrity of the jetty, but I don't see anywhere that it gives them the authority outside of being a spoils easement to use this, put the sand dike on parcel B and C. But I've seen those renderings that show this spine with, that provides the structural integrity to the jetties. So I've seen that, but when you look at the document they have, the legal easement they have, it talks more specifically about a spoils easement, not a sand dike. That's where the disconnect is, but I have seen those renderings that you've talked about.
Sure. Well, if he gets it, maybe he can pop it up so everybody can see what we've been discussing.
Thank you, Mr. Ramshaw. Next up, Mr. Foreman.
Yeah, it is a very complex situation having to do over a period of several decades, of which I was on board here for many of those, including the amendments to the comprehensive plan, doing portions of that. And the fact that you haven't found specific minutes or votes mean very little, and the reason is you haven't found them is because you vote on that as a body. Is that the advertisements went out and they invited people to come to be in a public hearing motion. Not only that, in those days, the comprehensive plan amendments went before the Planning and Zoning Commission first, which was a formal body that looked at every bit of this. And there are minutes of that out there that haven't been produced. So there's a lot more involved in this, and at that point in time, the situation was the purpose of having these 5-year intervals is to correct the situation as it pertains to today, meaning that you want to update your zoning and your land use to be relevant to that time and place that you're in. And so you do make changes. You don't have one original plan that you stick to forever. And the fact was that it did change, but it changed, as they said, based upon a lawsuit, and the results of that applied to the whole city, in fact, so that you did make those changes, and you would not have a specific notation on your flume which would show that the change was made because of that one case. It would just appear on your whole map. So there's lots of opportunities in there to go back and look and to be confused. The motion on the floor is to have another attorney come in and go through all of this and to explain to us one more time what the problem is. And I can almost assure you, you're not going to be any better off after that than you are right now. It's just that you have to, each of us have to go through this and make up our own minds as to what we think. It can't be done by somebody else for us. And so what I'm saying here is that I don't have any objection to another quote-unquote expert looking at this and making sure that it's right, but they're going to get presented with the same paperwork that you've got, with essentially the same people explaining it. And so I'm just saying, you know, I know we want to get it right, and I know there's a lot of concern here about the outcome of this, and I think we're finding out a lot about it. But it's going to come down at some point in time to the fact that even if you do decide that you want to make a change in the land use, it's still got to go public. It's still got to put out there for public hearings. It's still got to go out there before the local planning agency for examination and for review. And you're going to, this will not be solved in the next 6 months at the earliest. So even if you want to make a change. And then you're going to inject us into the middle of these folks' lawsuits that are pending, where we are not now at. And why would we want to do that? It boggles my mind as to why we don't want to see the outcome of that, since they're spending their money and not our money. And it would be better off if we let them solve it, and then if the outcome of that is that a mistake was made, then we'll correct it.
Thank you, Mr. Foreman. Next up, Mr. Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, there was sorry, this phone's ringing. I can't hear it. My wife is wondering
That's your
where
wife.
I'm at.
You better take that, Mr. Wood.
Let me turn this thing off.
My wife's here, so I'm good.
All right, let me just turn it off.
Oh, you better take that, Jim.
That's my wife. She
I know. Just put it on speaker.
It's not even 10 o'clock yet, man, really?
Okay.
All right. You know, a council person sitting up here about 10 years ago when I was thinking about running for council the first time, used to take a lot of votes and seemed to vote the right way a lot of the time, but never said anything. And one time I asked him, you know, why don't you talk more? And he said, I can keep my mouth shut and have folks think I'm a fool, or I can open it and confirm it. So, Mr. Foreman, I like your comments you made. And one of my concerns is we voted, last meeting to bring in an outside attorney. I don't have a problem doing that, but I agree with Mr. Foreman's comments. My concern is, at some point in time, we have to accept the facts in front of us. And there are some folks that are never going to accept that. No matter, I mean, I hate to say, I could bring Jesus in here. If it doesn't agree with some of y'all, you ain't going to buy it. At some point in time, we got to bring somebody in. We agree this person's going to be the arbitrator. What they figure out is what we're going to accept. And that's just not going to happen. I don't trust that to happen. And I have a concern that, I mean, there's been a lot of name calling on this, and a lot of folks that were accused of doing things. And in this list here, we have all these dates before most of us were up here. Yet people have been called names. It was somebody's fault, and it was not somebody's fault up here. And that concerns me. The name calling's got to stop. You know, we're talking about having some mediation done, and mediation is not just a 6-day-a-week item, it's a 7-day-a-week item. You don't say mediation, you come in here on Monday nights and call folks names. That doesn't work anymore. So, you know, if you want to have a vote and bring in an attorney, fine. Let's bring him in, but whoever that person is we bring in, then what they say, we need to accept it and move on.
Thank you, Mr. Wood. Next up, Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mayor. Just before we voted on it, move to the vote, I just wanted to reiterate that everything that I've read that's been provided for me, and even things that I've reached out myself and made phone calls and got documentation, it all goes back to Crystal Beach, even this 1996 meeting where they adopted the ordinance 151-13. It still says amendment of the future land use map by creating 2 new land use categories in the Crystal Beach area, changing the use categories on certain properties in the Crystal Beach area. Everything I keep reading just keeps going back to Crystal Beach area. Nothing, maybe it's in here somewhere in some fine print that it says, you know, the entire community or Destin, but nothing that I've read states that. It keeps going back to, just says Crystal Beach area. And so I think somewhere along the line, somebody has just assumed that just included the entire Destin. But anyway, that's all I want to say, Mayor. That, and then we've agreed to hire an attorney to look at this Heritage Park that we've been beating that dead horse for 6 years. We've agreed to hire another attorney to look at that. So I think this is just as important, you know, to hire an attorney to maybe give us a third look at it. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Appreciate that. Next up, Ms. Trammell.
I agree with Mr. Wood. I'm not against hiring an attorney. It's what we do with the information. And if we're going to go that far, we need to stick to our guns and do it. Whatever, and accept whatever comes out. Just as, I guess my memory is foggy at this late hour. Did we not still put in our comp plan that we would address issues on Holiday Isle after the lawsuits that were pending, or did we remove that?
Sorry, that
I
was.
know it's not this case,
that
but
was
I'm just saying, did we say to do
There
that?
was a proviso in there having to do with the height limitation specifically. And so
Okay.
that would only apply to the height limitation.
Only to the height, not to this issue? When it's settled in the courts, whatever that settles?
That's correct.
Okay. All right, then, I guess I agree with the motion. I just would like to put a caveat on the end of it that says we will accept whatever comes out. And I don't think that's gonna happen.
Thank you, Ms. Trammell. Mr. Marler?
One final word. We can't second guess what the council did in the 90s. We have to look at what's here and now. And to go back and look at records and stuff and say, well, why isn't it in there? We don't know. I mean, Mr. Bailey wasn't here as the clerk. I mean, Mr. Casella wasn't even here as the manager back then. None of us, except maybe Mr. Foreman, might have been on the council at that time, because I remember, well, first time I ran was in 96, and I lost. There were 11 people for 4 seats, and I don't know how many is going to be in this one coming up. But of those 11 people, one of the council members was a member that I didn't necessarily like particularly, but he calls me up and says, I want to appoint you to a committee. I said, why? You and I both disagree on stuff. He says, you have the potential, you just need to learn from the inside and before you try to do something to change things. And that's where I'm at. We can't know what they were thinking in 96. We sit here and go, well, Crystal Beach, but Crystal Beach, the litigation in Crystal Beach, which was one of the bones of contention, believe it or not, by the 2000 elections, also had impacts, as Mr. Shirley is trying to say. It impacted the entire city. It didn't just impact Crystal Beach. Yes, that area was the one pointed out, but if it impacted that area, it also impacted the other areas. The point being, the here and now is we can't go back and correct something that other council members did without, well, personally an act of Congress or a lot of other things. So we have to go with the here and now. And I agree with Mr. Wood. We've got to learn, if we hire another attorney, we got to learn to accept what this final attorney, and that doesn't mean just the council, that means the citizens that are upset with the way things are. We've got to come to that conclusion that whatever happens, this is it, because the buck's got to stop somewhere. How much money do we want to keep spending on one parcel when we have a lot of other areas in this city that need some of the same help? So, I mean, as we go into another spring break and all the other stuff we've got to put up with, this is small compared to the safety of the citizens and where our tax dollars are being spent. So to me, we need to get this straightened out and done. We've spent too much time on this now, and I think we just need to get it done. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Marler, thank you. We do have a first by Mr. Dixon, a second by Mr. Marler. Is there any further discussion? That is to hire outside counsel. Sure.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
And is this area of land, B, C, and all that, is it even part of Holiday Isle? I know we keep talking about Holiday Isle, but I didn't think it was actually part of Holiday Isle.
That is, I believe, and Mr. Matthews can correct me, I believe that is subject to some of the litigation. Is all of be in the Holiday Isle Improvement District?
All the property is within the Holiday Isle, however, the CCRs for Holiday Isle Improvement Association do not apply to all the parcels.
So even that's a complicated issue. There's,
Never mind, sorry.
Another lawyer.
All right, discussion, Mr. Braden?
Do we need to, put in there any type of, specify where we get this attorney from? I mean, we don't want council or the staff to go hire Mr. Matthews over there to look at it and bring us back his recommendation. Yeah, when we say
That's a good question.
when we say we want to hire outside counsel, I'd like to get some, somebody that has no knowledge of this, my honest opinion.
similar to the issue associated with the BI Inc. that you asked us to. We reached outside of the area to somebody that was not impacted, basically on the coast. And that's why we went to the Tallahassee area to be able to find that attorney. So we'll do the same here to try to find somebody who doesn't have any real or perceived conflict of interest and bring that, individual to you.
Great.
That's
Thank-
the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Ms. Trammell? Mike?
Can you also bring us a cost and where we're gonna get the money and how we're gonna do that? Okay.
Yes.
All right, we have a first by Mr. Dixon, second by Mr. Marlar. Seeing no more discussion, let's call the vote. Motion passes 6-1. All right.
I don't have anything else.
Thank goodness.
Outstanding. Now we got comments from the audience. Is Mr. Willie Smith still here? Do you still want to speak? Okay, since he is gone, of course, at this point in time, there's 5 minutes. Anyone like to speak? Mr. Bagby, please come up and state your name for the record.
Well, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Jim Bagby, 4709 Sea Star Vista. I just wanted to thank you for your service too, and wish you well. One of the things on the TDT that you might consider in the presentation, and we've had this conversation on the sheriff's funding before. I know that's a bone that I like to beat. Okay, all of Okaloosa Island is in Okaloosa County, so they ought to pay for all of that, but they ought to split down the middle the cost of Destin. So the Destin taxpayer ought to pay half of that 70%, and the county ought to pay half for a couple of reasons. The calls, if you look at the single biggest call location, my guess is it's going to be the county park at James Lee Park. That, or it'll be Holiday Isle, which I think is included in the Destin. I know those large individual houses, but if you look at the single land mass of where they're called, but all of Destin's beaches are in the county. And the county benefits from the property tax collected on all that property in Destin. So they ought to be ponying up those tax dollars, those ad valorem dollars that they are collecting on that beachfront property and paying their fair share, not just for Okaloosa Island, which they ought to be paying 100% for, but they ought to be paying 50% of the portion that goes to or comes out of Destin. That would be my recommendation. I agree, the TDT, there are ways, Walton County does not use it, but Bay County does. But that's, if you can get the TDC to reimburse you, that's good. But we shouldn't be paying the lion's share of the cost. The county should be paying the lion's share of the cost. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bagby. Appreciate it very much. Next. Mr. Mitchell? Mr. Shelton, you read it? Okay. No problem.
I just want to clarify something because I know Councilman Marla had a question, and I know I spoke many hours ago and I talked real quick because I was trying to fit a whole lot in a small amount of time. But when I started, I said, for the record, I am in favor of spending the money for additional spring break. It's not that I'm against that. I'm challenging the 70%, just like Mr. Bagby just said, okay? The other thing that wasn't discussed about possible funding mechanisms, not only do we have the TDC, but you also have the county itself, just like Mr. Bagby said. If I owed you $1 and somebody else is willing to put up 70 cents of it, I'll give you the 30 cents. So of course the county's going to say yes. But we certainly should have gone back to the county and said, wait a minute, 50-50, whatever the case may be. But just keep this in mind in the future, the 70%, that does not represent Destin citizens. Okay, and I agree with other council members up here. We certainly have to think about the safety of our people, and that's paramount. But again, if we don't use the TDC, we should at least go back to the BCC and say, hey, 70 is not right. As a suggestion to TDC, to Mr. Dixon, we know successfully people have used special operations, special fund. So when we do go to the TDC, rather than just saying, will you fund this, we ought to try to write it up as a special plan. Okay, I just want to make sure of that, because we probably have a better chance of doing that. And I've talked to several people in the TDC and other things, and this is one of those questions they never answer, but I brought it up tonight. Why is water safety accessible and approvable, and yet land safety is not? They always look with their deer in the headlight look, okay? Safety is safety. And if we care about our tourists in the water, we ought to care about them in land. Thank you, and all the best to you, Mayor Ponder.
Thanks, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it very much. Okay, next, Mr. Shelton.
Mayor, thank you one more time.
Thank you.
I promise not to spend all my whole 5 minutes.
You're fine. You're good.
During Captain Pico's earlier remarks, when he began speaking about this, he made the comment that our biggest problem last year was single-family houses. I've been crying this tune for 2 years, and I'm going to tell you, a $4,000 rental, the same $200,000 is going to be collected for that TDC, whether there's 20 people in there or whether there's 40 people in there. And we're creating our own problem here because the city council will not commit to occupancy limits on single-family rentals. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Next up, Ms. Bell.
I apologize, I don't have a map for this one, but I have a picture on my phone, and this is conservation lands according to the state of Florida. And those conservation lands in pink, to everyone that's out there, are over the entire parcel B and C. And when you have part of your comp plan that says that a piece of property may be conservation or HDR according to its neighboring parcels, that you're supposed to choose the one that has the most stringent, I'm missing the words because I don't have it in front of me because I wasn't prepared for this.
Okay.
But conservation is conservation is conservation. That's what it is. That's what it should be. HDR doesn't mean anything when the state has it in pink. That's all of parcel B and C, all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, all the way over to the East Pass. That's what it is. It's conservation. It's been there since at least 1982. At least 1982. So take that into consideration next time.
Thanks, Ms. Bell. Appreciate it. Next. Okay. With that, we'll close the public portion. Ms. Trammell, did you want to say something first? Okay.
I've said this before, and this is really a council procedural thing before we leave. Several times tonight, we've had to set aside the agenda and had special votes. And many years ago, I think Mr. Bagby was on the council at that time. I know Mr. Destin was on the council at that time. And at that time, we agreed to govern ourselves so that if we wanted to bring something up like that for a vote, we made sure that it was agenda'd, because it provided the public with what we were going to talk about. Every one of those items tonight, I think everybody agreed, to be honest with you, were great. But there's going to come up a controversial item that's going to come up. We're going to set it aside. We're going to make a motion. We're going to make a vote. And the public's sitting out here saying, well, I didn't have any say-so in that. And I don't think it's fair to the public. If we want to be open about everything we do up here, it's very simple. You just come up tonight and you say, all right, next week I'm going to put this and this and this on the agenda, and we're going to vote on it. It'll be out there. It'll be a public agenda. Everybody will know what's going to be brought up. And then people can have an interest in it. We discussed long and hard tonight, were people notified about this discussion, and were they notified about that decision, and were they, you can't if you bring it on board and it's not an emergency. Now, when we had the oil spill, we did a lot of those. But that was an emergency situation. What we brought up tonight, for the most part, is not necessarily an emergency situation that could not have been agended next meeting. So I just want the council to consider that in the future, because if we're going to sit here and say we want to be transparent, then we really should be transparent. So I don't mind bringing my stuff up and bringing it the next time. And if there's something that we're bringing up that has an item that you've received or something like that, include it in the packet. Because I'll tell you, for one, I'm a visual learner, and if I see it, it's much easier for me than sitting here listening to somebody talk about it, because it just kind of goes in one ear and out the other. And I encourage everybody, audience and everybody else, if you're here and you'd want to do a presentation, give us a piece of paper, because it goes then in the documentation. If it doesn't, we don't get it. And just like, how many times did we say up here tonight, I don't know what council did then, I don't remember, because there's not a piece of paper in the packet. So it helps. It really, truly helps. I know it's a pain in the neck, but it does help. So I just wanted to remind council that's a way that everybody can have input into it. And I think you find a lot less discussion and a lot less negativity if they know what you're going to bring up to begin with, and then they can get behind it. Okay? That's just it. Thank you for your time and in your indulgence. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Trammell. Well said, and definitely something to take into account going forward. Just be real quick, I know about my last official meeting that I oversee is tonight. The last thing I'll do as mayor is welcome the Northwest Florida League of Cities to Destin for a dinner on the 14th. And I'm very honored to do that. This journey that I've been on, and this has been one that's been of great humility, but yet one of great honor. I'd be foolish to think that every decision or thought I had was right, but I believe that every decision I made was done with a pure heart, with the intent to better the things that I felt were in my heart. And early on were furthering the things I think Destin stands for is family, hospitality, honor, opportunity, and generations, the 5 values I came out with last year. I still stand on that. My wife is here. Mona, would you stand up, please? I know I outpunted my coverage, but she kept me around. She stuck with me for 24 years so far. Thankfully, we've got a lot more to go. But she's a huge blessing, and she's been patient with me in this, and very supportive, extremely supportive. What's that? Tough woman. I know. Tough. Yeah, she needs the award, absolutely. But I just really want to say, I think there's been a lot of things over the last couple of years I'm very thankful for and very proud of. Obviously, as tonight, there's a lot of things that need to be resolved, and as I've said before, out of tension can come great resolution. But also know on the backside of what's a tense moment in our community is we still need to work together going forward. I mean, despite whatever happens, there's going to be another issue that will come up that we need each other. And if the chips fall down, if we never need to have another oil spill, we're family. We got to look out for each other and take care of each other. And I look back over the last couple of years, and I'm extremely honored to think about. I look at the unusual favor our city's had in the last 2 years economically. I mean, probably over $15 million in grant kind of money coming into our city. For a city of our size, that's huge. I look at over $800,000 or $900,000 in annual cash flow savings through bond refinances and things like that. I mean, economically, the city's in a good place, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of our city that we preserve family values that, to me, I think is our heritage and our core. I think that's something I believe in and where we're going. And so I know that the 19th, they've asked me to come back, which that's Sam's opportunity. But I'll come back because Ray said he'll have crab cakes. And so, I think, like this wall over here, as small as it is, to me, I think it's important because we always need to recall our history. And that's, many times, what did we do? What do we do? That's going to be a storyboard as a memorial stone for our city to recall what we did in certain years of our community that we can always reflect upon. And I think it's important we remember our history. Why? Because there'll be a next council after this one and one after that, and someone's telling the story. And we'll have a history now of what story we tell. And that's important. And when our kids come in, or youth council comes in, they ask, what's the question? We say, there's what we did. And that's important, because I got kids, and, you know, I'd love the honor of one of them one day serving up here with this council. And I'd love them to look back and say, hey, look what our city did over the last 20, 30 years. It's pretty cool stuff. So anyway, I just real quickly wanted just to wait till the evening to thank you for putting up with me. The credit card, I ask your forgiveness. No ill intent was meant whatsoever, and I think the state attorney affirmed that. And so I was glad. If there's anything else I did that brought, any kind of harm to the city, forgive me, but I believe with a pure heart I served. As I said before, this position is not as how you can pat yourself as mayor. To me, it showed how low I can go to serve. And that's the same attitude I hope to take with me where I go from here. And obviously, I would be honored to continue to serve in any capacity I can that I'm allowed to. But this council is an amazing group. To co-labor with y'all has been a huge blessing in my life. Each of you bring an amazing attribute to the city. That's what makes us great. And I love the diversity of this council, and I believe it's through that diversity of us working together is why we can achieve greater things. And when we focus on what unites us instead of what divides us, we're going to achieve even greater things. It's easy to sit back and tell us what's wrong, but when you focus on what we're doing that's right, and I'll tell you, it's a game changer to propel us into a new level. And so that's one of the things I would love to leave behind is to continue to focus on what unites us, and that's always been something that's a passion in my heart. Made a lot of great new friends, and Karen's not here, which, amen. I love that woman. And she can bake too. Lord, and who's had Miss Karen's baking before? Hallelujah. And she's a good artist, and that pecan pie, hallelujah, that's good stuff. Making me hungry, man. I know, it's good. Anyway, just gets late. I love you guys. I love this city. Thank you for allowing me to serve for the last couple of years, and then releasing me to pursue something that I'm passionate about stepping into, and it's been an honor. And I'll be back on the 19th to have some crab cakes and say goodbye again. But council, I love you guys. I'm really honored by your friendship. Looking forward to what the greater things lie ahead for the city. And with that, this meeting's adjourned.